Hello, hello. Thank you all for attending my webinar on how to switch careers to UX. My name is Tim Rosenberg, and with me, my other co-host is Hussein Dawani. Do you want to say hi?
Hey, hi guys, I'm Hussein Dawani. I'm one of the mentors along with Tim on ADPList.
Awesome. So we are excited to have this group with us today. For those who have a question, I provided a link to ask your questions. If you see a question that has already been asked that you also have, feel free to upvote it as well. Yeah, so with that, we will go ahead and get started. So let me pull up a little bit about just some overall tips and tricks for those getting started into switching careers. So I want to begin by telling a story. So let's imagine, let's see, is my screen showing? All good? Let's see, hold on, let me make sure I show the right screen. There we go. Okay. This is how to find us on ADPList. If you want to book an appointment with us, do a one-on-one mentor session. So I want to talk about, how to become a UX designer for switching careers. I want to kind of paint a picture for those that, let's say that you're in the hospitality industry, so totally unrelated to UX design. You feel like you want a career change, but you think like, well, how do I go from where I am today to where I want to go later? So step one is really like learning the craft. So that could be through like an online course, a boot camp, through formal education, and really getting doing some hands-on projects that give you very relevant skill sets. I will say that the most successful students that I have seen go through these courses are those that have a very motivating drive and maybe a project in particular that they want to produce. And if you're switching careers, showcase your background experience into your portfolio. So identify a focus. One challenge with career switchers, let's say, for example, if you spent 10 years in one career, try to find like a focus of presenting your portfolio so that it's not too far over the place. So you might consider multiple websites. Let's say that you're a musician, you're a baker, you are a photographer, but then you also, you're a wedding planner, and you also want to do a UX designer. It might be confusing for a recruiter to look at your UX portfolio if you list your wedding planning services and your music services, because it's not really kind of what they're looking for. A better approach is you might say, hey, I used to be in this industry and I designed an app to kind of to address a problem that I've identified. That's probably a better way to kind of focus your portfolio. Make sure you're listing out the problem that you're addressing, the process that you take, the product that you've made, and the results. When you create all of your website material, be sure to design and brand it. So think about your fonts and colors, create multiple versions of your resume so that everything looks matched and consistent. Now, step three, once you've created all your content, you're ready to make that career switch. It's difficult to start over. If you feel like you're in a dead-end career and now you're starting from step one, you might think that you're starting from zero, but that's actually not the case. So first, begin on projects that address your industry. If you work in hospitality, maybe you should redesign an app for Toast or maybe Grubhub, to reimagine, what are the pain points in the hospitality industry that you, as someone who's in that world, have specialty in expertise in. And so although it might feel like you're starting over, you're actually starting with a step up, because you actually have industry experience with a particular sector in UX that an art student might not have that same level of expertise. Next, think about offering UX design to your current employer. So let's say that you work for a tech company, but you're in the customer support department, totally not related to UX. Talk to your current employer and say, hey, here's the design that I put together to improve our current app. And in addition to that, look into internal transfers. Employers are more likely to kind of offer you the position if they already know you, so they get an idea of your work. It's a lot easier to get into internal transfers and apply to UX roles within your sector. So if you, let's say, for example, you're a teacher and now you want to switch to UX design. It might be difficult to start over, but let's say that you wanted to be a UX designer for an online learning application or maybe Khan Academy. When you put your resume and job out there, not only do you have the UX design portfolio and experience, but you're also coming in with the experience that you already have. So leveraging the existing career that you've had is one of the most overlooked aspects of those who are switching careers. And then after you've put all that together, start doing outreach. So join an organization like ADPList, build meaningful relationships, volunteer, and really get your stuff out there. And most importantly, produce content. So make sure that you are putting your stuff out there on LinkedIn, putting your designs on Instagram, maybe talking about your work on YouTube and Dribble. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive into some Q&A. So let me show a couple questions that come up. So I feel like I'm starting over. How can I best use my experience to get a UX role? So I would say the number one tip is to start with projects that are already in your industry and to apply to companies that are in your previous experience. Hussein, what is your take on some of these questions?
Yeah, I think for me, like boot camps, I did not attend them so much. So for me, like, it was a completely different experience than what other might face. So I did like my first foot in the door was like through a course by Acumen and Ideal, which was like free of cost. And like for me, it was just like it just happened that I stumbled upon one of these courses just for the sake of like, learning something new. And ultimately, like, I was like curious, so I did like a lot of like side projects just to support myself and like, just to explore and learn. So yeah, that's how I got started.
Okay. And what was that? I guess what was your first role? How did you get your very first role
So
into
my
UX?
so for my very first role, like so I got an internship here in Hong Kong. So currently, like, I guess back in 2018 I was looking for like internships in UX, and Hong Kong was one of the like, emerging markets, and like, where a lot of like UX designers were working. So what I thought was that, okay, I want to move from a full-time filmmaker role to like, I will go into internships, and that's how I got started.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so for me, like it was like usually people are like, they go through a process like internship and then full-time. For me, it was like full-time internship and then full-time again.
Okay.
So that's how it started for me. And I just like randomly like looked over LinkedIn for a bunch of internships, And I was also part of like a student organization who was sending people abroad on exchange for different internship programs. So I went through that to Hong Kong. And yeah, and I think my, like, at that time, my employer was looking for like someone with visual design skills and not like very solid on like experience like UX design related stuff. So yeah, so for me, like it worked like that.
That's great insight. For me, I think so I guess my path is a little bit more traditional. So I went to a 4-year university to study graphic design. And so it is similar to UX design, but it's actually very different in a way. So for me, like when I was doing graphic design, I was doing logos and maybe like websites, but more static. So as I entered UX, one thing that maybe is unconventional is that I used to be more of like a visual art student. And the way that helped me transition into UX is that although UX design is not really the same thing as artwork, however, you still have to think about color. It gave me like that background gave me experience in like lightness and darkness of color, color contrasts, color harmony. And so although like maybe one sector might be totally different, some things do translate over. So let's see. This question is coming up. What are the common mistakes or knowledge gaps that you've seen from people who are switching into UX that are self-taught as opposed to a designer coming from an education or a design bootcamp? That's a really great question. One thing that I see is that self-taught UX designers that don't have formal training, they tend to come up with their own kind of UI design patterns that can be sometimes confusing because it's something that they invented. Once you have formal training, one principle that I have found is that it's sometimes a better user experience to use conventional patterns. So using standard login flows, standard form creations, standard button designs, often demonstrate someone who is very well experienced. And someone who hasn't had that formal education, they might end up creating something that is a little confusing or maybe unconventional that might maybe confuse or mislead a user. What do you think?
I think for me, I always try to catch up with the market trends. So I will like follow whatever is happening in the industry and like try to practice it. Of course, the conventional way works, like, how you, like, you might end up like, checking out like what NN Group is doing, or like, what some of the other people are doing. But I think for me, like, it is more about using the latest methods so that you can be up to the trends with the market. But at the same time, like, traditional ways have always worked. So, like, these are the like tried and tested like tips and tricks. So you can always rely on that, but you should always look for like new methods through which you can learn things and practice things. So I think for me, it works like that.
That's a really great point. So I'm seeing that this question is very popular. I feel I'm not ready to transition into UX. How do you know when you're ready to start looking for your first role? So really great question. I think a couple of things that are important is number one, making sure that you have some form of education based on whatever you can afford. So that could be maybe like a university, it could be a boot camp. So make sure that you have at least some sort of educational background so that you get the fundamentals. The next step is seeing if you can get hands-on projects where you feel, very, very confident in your abilities. I think the strongest indication to transition into UX is really the transition can start really at any time. So you can say that like any day you can say, all right, I'm ready to like start a course. So step one, start your education. Step two, like get your hands on with real projects. And a key sign that you're ready for an actual role is when you can predict what steps are necessary ahead of time through the design process. Someone who's new might feel very scared or uncertain about what to do. Once you have enough projects to where you understand, okay, I understand that we'll go through this phase of discovery, we'll go through these phases of flows, and then we'll create the final prototype. Once you have done it enough times to feel confident in the flow, that's when you're really sort of ready to apply. What do you think about this question?
I think I think definitely, like, this is one of the common questions I've gotten from my mentees as well in the past. I think you never know, like, when you're ready. Like, it
Yeah,
is like some, it is like,
that's
you
life.
can never know. Like, it's not a recipe, right? It's not like you're cooking food and like, oh, now like the food is ready. It's not like that. It's sometimes like, you try, test, you fail, and then you try again. All right.
Mm,
Um, in my experience, I never knew, like, when I was ready for UX, like, when I was applying for my first full-time UX job, like, I was not sure what I was getting myself into. I knew that, like, okay, these are some of the things that people do. Like, I still remember when I had my first full-time UX job, and I was working for a photogrammetry software. Like, I mean, like, a lot of people in this call right now don't even know what is for photogrammetry software. Even I did not know that, and I just went in there. I did not even know how to conduct a user research, so I took like some help from friends. So, and I think I just like tried out different things, experimented different things, and like, tried to see, like, what works for me. I think one thing is, like, it depends on your employer as well. Like, how open are they towards experimentation and like learning along the process. So I've seen like bunch of like companies hiring people, like especially like, those companies which are already not so mature. They're okay hiring people who are learning by experience. I think because they're like more on the startup environment, and like, they are okay with like, trying and testing. So it depends on that as well. So I would recommend like, having like some side projects that you can work on. Like for me, my first project that I worked on was like people with upper limb disability. So it was not a digital screen. It was actually a prosthetic arm for people with disability. So I think it depends. It depends, like, how, what approach you want to take. So try it out, like try different ways through which you can test out different projects. If you cannot find an internship, if you cannot find a full-time job, create a side project on your own. Like, ask other people, do you need any help with this thing? You can do like on a pro bono basis or something like that as well.
yeah, definitely. That's really great insight. Another question that came up was, um, is, what do you do if your previous example is totally unrelated? I think this goes back to what I was mentioning before. So in this example, someone is an engineer or a natural science researcher. Um, if your previous experience is totally like unrelated, you might think like, oh wow, like I'm starting all over. I think what a good place to start is becoming working on UX projects within the natural science research industry. So about that world, and if what are the pain points, how could you maybe make a app or a website that helps those, then that will like certainly improve. One thing, so this actually talks about interacting with customers. One thing that you will learn is that you shouldn't take criticism of your designs personally. So if you haven't worked with customers, or if you haven't worked with like a stakeholder on your feedback of your designs, you might take some of the criticisms to be very personally. But I'd say what you should work on improving is definitely being open to feedback and criticism as part of that process, and not being too offended if your designs need a change. What do you think?
I think a lot of these fields have interchangeable skills. So for example, engineers have like a logical way of thinking, and like, which actually helps a lot when you're working in UX. So like, how to better define the architecture of the information in your head, or like even on the screen. Like, I think engineers can do it really well. Natural science researchers, like, they have like some background in like, talking to people, conducting research and stuff like that. So a lot of fields have like interchangeable skills. Or maybe like you're into finance, like, you then if you take up a project in like, fintech or something, you would have like some information regarding finance. So these, like, your past experience are not useless. Actually, like, they help you a lot in your next role. um, I would say, like, in order to improve, or like in order to learn more, you should just try to, like, experiment. Like, I think everything comes with experimentation. So you should first see, like, what are the past experiences that you have had. Like for me, in my case, I studied filmmaking, so I was a documentary producer before that. So for me, it was more about like gathering information or talking to people. That was like some interchangeable skills that I acquired. And like creating narrative is something that I acquired as well from my past experience. So you should see, like, what are some of the skills that you have gained in your past experience, and how can you implement that in your new role. Yeah.
Yeah, really great insight there. Um, I'm seeing a trend across a couple of questions, so I'm going to combine these. So this question is about what the market is like, the job market for junior designers. Um, so this question says, what is the job market realistically for junior UX designers? From what I've seen, most companies are looking for senior designers. And I will say that it really depends on the company and what stage of the company is at and how many designers they currently have. So if a company doesn't have any designers, if it's their first hire, they will want to hire someone who's very experienced to kind of set the foundation of the team. But once they grow into a larger organization and the product is broken out into multiple departments, you don't necessarily want too many senior people because, well, one, they're very expensive and more difficult to recruit. And sometimes the tasks that need to be done are very junior with some senior guidance. So realistically, like you can still get a job as a UX designer. And one of these questions, is also talking about that you need experience of at least 2 to 3 years if you're just starting out. So although it might feel like entry-level positions are out of reach, when they say 2 to 3 years, what that could also mean is like 2 to 3 years of like working on projects, working on maybe volunteer side projects, education, and getting hands-on experience. So with entry-level positions, they are certainly out there. It just depends on the size and the organization. I would highly warn against joining a company as a entry-level designer if there are no other designers, because if you're entry level, you won't really have anyone to kind of guide and direct you. And it puts a lot of responsibility on you to set the foundation if you don't have that experience. So I would say just, make sure to look for a company that already has like an established team for a junior role. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I have seen a little bit different trend recently. So some startups, they hire like junior designers, and then they have like a consulting agency that they work with. And the consulting agencies, like their role is more of a strategic role, like, in terms of UX.
Mhm.
And they will like, give you some advices how to work, or how to approach, like, conduct like different kind of workshops, and build up kind of like a direction for you. And then the junior designers are the ones who are like doing more like hands-on design for that.
Yes, yeah, I
uh,
agree.
yeah, so that's what I've like recently seen. I think in the past I did not see it so much, but recently I think that this trend is like pumping up. And then like for me, like my first role, like, that company was like my first full time, like, that company was actually looking for someone more senior. So the person who recommended me, they wanted to hire that person, but he recommended me instead, because that guy was like with 8 years of work experience, more expensive, like
Mhm,
probably like twice than what I was asking for.
mhm.
So so for the company was not able to afford that. So like, they wanted someone who's like more of a junior design role. So
Mhm.
I think like, you need to find the right company that you can work with. Also, like, even though they might select 2 or 3 years of experience, not definitely they would go for like a 2 or 3 years experience. I think some people who have like 2 3 years of experience, they don't even have like that interesting project, or like, that many projects under their sleeve. So think about it, like, how you as a person, like, even if you're an entry level designer, how can you stand out? Like, what projects have you done? Definitely, like, it doesn't have to be like with some internships, can be one of your like personal projects. Maybe like you opened up your own e-commerce store, and you did a design for the website, or like, you helped out a friend who was starting a startup. um, Add all of that, or like, you picked up like some freelance projects, like, add all of these things that could bring relevance, and like, make your argument more solid.
Yeah, definitely. I certainly agree with those. So for this next question is, how important is to know different design tools? Should I be learning how to use Photoshop, Illustrator on top of Figma, Adobe XD, etc.? This is a really great question. And I would say that, so I come from a like more of a graphic design background. So we used to do a lot of Illustrator, a lot of Photoshop work. When I transitioned into UX design, I actually don't really use Illustrator or Photoshop very much. It's very rare that I need to. Sometimes for like image processing, like if I'm working on an e-commerce project, maybe you have to like tweak an image of a product. But um, in my experience, you might want to say that you're like competent in those supplementary tools, but I primarily use like Figma. So Figma is my like my primary tool that I use. Sometimes a little bit of Sketch. It really depends on what aspect you want to do. So I would say that if you want to work for a consumer facing product that has a lot of illustrations, a lot of pictures. So um, let's say that you want to work for maybe like an app for kids. It's going to be very illustrative. So you might, I would say that if you want to work for a company that has more visual custom assets, you want to learn those skills. For me personally, I'm mostly just working on UI. I'm not really working on illustration deliverables or even photos, really. So I haven't really been as fluent in Photoshop and Illustrator on top of Figma. I will say that it does help to learn a little bit of front-end development for UX design, just so you know how to talk to engineers. But it's not necessary to master. So I would say that like for me, Figma is my primary tool, and then the other tools are like kind of nice to have. What do you think?
I think for me, like, when I was doing like before diving into UX, I was also doing like freelance brand design stuff. So for me at that time, it was more Photoshop heavy or Illustrator heavy. Right now, I think I did transition from like XD to Figma because my company was changing the primary platform for tooling. But I think Photoshop and Illustrator, sometimes I use it like, to generate mockups and like stuff like that. But now you can do all of that stuff in Figma as well. So uh, yeah, I think completely depends on what kind of projects you're working on. Yeah.
That's great. So we're coming up to time. So the last thing that we'll do is maybe share one piece of advice for aspiring new UX designers switching careers. So for me, my one piece of advice for you starting out on a new career switch is that success is not really linear. Success isn't like, okay, I took an online course, now I'm done. Now I want my full-time senior role tomorrow. It's often more of a bumpy journey. So you will try something, you will fail, you'll learn from it, then you'll try again, you'll like work harder, and then you'll learn what you really enjoy. So it's more of a non-linear path. And I would highly recommend not to be discouraged if you don't see the job that you want as soon as possible, but just, know that it is a journey that takes time, and that trying something new and failing at it, but then learning from it is part of success. Any last piece of advice?
Yeah, I think, well, I did not prepare like, a solid argument like yours, but for me, I think for me as a person like who transitioned from I was already in the creative industry and then I transitioned. I think for me, like it was more about believing in the things that I'm doing, and what is my goal. So for me, like my goal in when I was a filmmaker was to tell people stories and the narrative and how I can effectively tell that. So that was my core, and that core still remained the same when I transitioned into UX. So I believe that just stay to the core value that you're trying to gain, or the goal that you're trying to achieve. And while doing that, try to learn from the people around you, and try to be more open. That is going to help you secure not just UX roles, but any role that you want to take on.
All right, awesome. Well, we are at time. Thank you all so much for attending. And we will send out a link to our profiles on ADPList, and we look forward to mentoring with you soon. Take care.
Tim, there's a question. Would you be sharing the recording?
Yes, I will be uploading this to. I'll be uploading a link to this, and I can share it in an email for those that want to do a recap. All right, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.